こんにちは。私の名前はホーコンです。今日はもっと日本語を学びます。Hello, my name is Hakon, and today we will learn a bit more Japanese. So, in our previous episode, I introduced questions with the question particle ka at the end of a verb, and today we will talk a little bit more about questions. So last time we had a question, we had a positive answer and a negative answer. We had yes and no. And today I'm going to do a little bit more with questions. So let's just make sure I'm in the right place now. Okay, so we have この人は誰ですか？この人は誰ですか? So, what do we have here? I'll just make little dots to distinguish different elements now. So, この人 means this person. 人 means person, human being. この is a demonstrative. And I'll say a little bit more about how demonstratives work in a minute when I've done a few more sentences. So, この人は誰ですか? This person, theme. And because it's a theme and not a subject, it means that that is information that is obvious, understood, already implied by what's gone before. So that's not the important part of the sentence, but dare desu ka, who is. So dare means who, desu means to be, so who is this person? Or who is this person, I suppose. And this, in this case, means that there's somebody who is actually just standing right next to you, pretty much, and you're talking about him and or her, indeed. So the answer could be, for instance, その人は let's do 林さんです。So, この人は誰ですか? Who is this person? その人は that person is Mr. Hayashi. So we have この人, or when you put a this or that in front of a noun, この人, その人. There are other ways to use this and that, but we'll get back to those later. So この means this, その means that in front of a noun. その人は that person is Hayashi san. And of course, san is one of those endings you put on names. It could be a first name, it could be a last name. It is a marker of respect and politeness and formality as well. But of course, it's quite a neutral one when it comes to formality. I'll say a little bit more about formality in a moment. So, その人は Hayashi-san desu. It's Mr. Hayashi, or it could also be Miss Hayashi, Ms. Hayashi, etc. It's just somebody called Hayashi, which is a relatively common last name, I believe, in Japan. Let's do another question. So we have あの人は誰ですか? Which also means who is that person. But now we've got three different demonstratives. We have この, その, and あの. And it might become obvious when the answer to that question could be あの人は What should we do? You. That's not a very good you, is it? Let's see. Oh, I'll get some paper to rub this out. Okay, so you, ki, ko, san, this. So, question. あの人は誰ですか? Who is that person? And the answer is あの人はYukiko-sanです. That person is Yukiko, which is the first name, so it's not a Miss or Mr. or anything, because san is something you put on names, whether they're first names, last names, when you're talking about someone apart from yourself. There are other things you can put on as well, but that is the main default neutral to slightly formal, I would say, one. So the demonstratives. So kono, sono, ano. There are three. In English, you have two different demonstrative levels. You have here and there. You have this and that. Of course, in English, there used to be three. You could have here, there, and yonder, or yon. And that's one that is preserved in some dialects and varieties of English, but not in standard English. So it's here, there, and over there, you can say, of course, in English. So the way it works is you have the speaker of the first question, or of the questions. Let's call him A. And then you have Mr. Hayashi. He is here. And A is talking to B, who is over there. Okay, so when you use kono hito, or when you use kono, it means that what you are talking about is closer to you than it is to the person you're talking to. So Mr. Hayashi, he is right here next to A, and so when A is talking to B, he is saying kono hito wa. B, when he answers, he is talking about Mr. Hayashi, who is then closer to the person he's talking to than to himself. And then you use sono. So, sono hito wa Hayashi-san desu. But if the person you're talking about is far away from both the people talking, so we have over here, is that within shot now? Yeah, just. So Yukiko, she is over here, and far away, she might be out of sight, just somewhere else completely, and A and B are talking about her, and she's not closer to any of them, and so for both of them, she is ano hito wa Yukiko-san desu. Ano hito wa dare desu ka? So, and because they use wa here, the theme particle, it means that the person you're talking about is, of course, obvious, I suppose, from the context. So, for instance, A and B, they're standing here. Yukiko, she is walking by, she passes them, and she goes on her merry way. And then A asks B, who is that person? And of course, obvious from the context, it is the one who just passed they're talking about, and that's Yukiko, and she is now ano hito because she is not close to any of them. So, three levels of demonstratives in Japanese, and I'll just put ko ... so ... and a ... because you have other endings you actually can put on those three initial syllables to give other demonstrative, to create other demonstrative words. There's koko, soko, asoko. There is kochira, sochira, achira. There is etc. So there are other things that use the same system, but they almost always, I must admit, they would start with ko, so, and a. And so that's the sort of basic pattern you can think of. Ko, something that's closer to you than the one you're speaking to. So, something that's closer to the person you're talking to, and a, something that's far away from both. So I hope that is obvious and clear. So there are actually some languages where you have not just 2 or 3 demonstratives, but you could have as many as 15 or 20. If you can imagine, I think there are some Inuit Eskimo languages that have, so it's closer to you. That's one thing, but it could also be something that isn't seen versus something that is seen. Something that is known to you but not to you, as an abstract thing inside you, etc. There could be things like that. There is really no technical limit to how demonstratives are done in languages. Another thing I wanted to say something about was level of formality. Now, this is something you will encounter in practical Japanese all the time, because in Japanese, in the language and the culture, and of course those are inseparable, really, you have to consider formality or politeness as how you word things, which words you choose, etc. This is something I haven't said much about before. Remember, I said that the pronoun for I and me is watashi, and the pronoun for you is anata. But there are actually many, many different pronouns for you and for me in Japanese, depending on context and who you're talking to. I'm not going to go into all of them now. I'm going to just mention it now as one thing to be aware of. And the same thing goes for other references to other people as well. In Japanese, you can actually use different verb endings depending on politeness level. And by politeness level, of course, there are different things. There's formality, is one aspect, but also when you're talking to someone, what kind of status they have relative to you is important. So if you are a grown-up talking to a child, you can use one set of pronouns and one set of verb endings. If you're talking to someone who's a friend on the same level, you use one set. If you are a customer talking to somebody in the shop, that might be different. If you are a waiter talking to the person you're serving, you might use a different way of talking. So it depends. Is the person you're talking to, is he above you or below you in status, or is it the same level? These are very important things in Japan, and also they are reflected in the Japanese language. What I will teach you in this basic Japanese course is mostly going to be the sort of the neutral, perhaps slightly formal way of talking, which is the safest and the one that should be your sort of your default and the one you start with when you're learning Japanese. And then when you're comfortable using that, I think that's when you should really start thinking about adding other things in. But I will mention something now because it also affects how you talk about other people as well. So even if you're talking to your friend now about these people you're asking about, so you could envision something like この方はどなたですか? This is exactly the same question as the first one here. It means exactly the same thing. It means this person who is. So who is this person? Exactly the same as the first sentence. But this is one notch up in formality or politeness. And of course, if you're talking about a person who's standing right there, it might actually be a good idea to up the level a little bit. But just to give an example of how it changes. So you're using a slightly different word for person. This is actually written with a different kanji as well. And donata using a different question word depending on the level. So what you will find is that some nouns, of course, they will change. Some adverbs will change, and also some verbs, not in this case, but in other cases, will also change depending on whether you're talking up, down, level, neutral, polite, formal, etc. This is something I will be talking about at later times as well, because but I will not say too much about it. But generally, and just as a rule of thumb, what I will teach you, and also what I will remind myself of, because that is what I learned in school, is mostly a sort of a neutral, semi-formal sometimes level of expressing yourself in Japanese. So with all that in mind, let's do our first kanji. I was wanting to do our first kanji as well today. So, and if you remember, kanji is one of the 3 ways of writing Japanese. We've learned hiragana. There's katakana, which I will have to teach you one of these days. It is actually a little bit harder than hiragana for some reasons. One is that the characters look more alike, many of them. And secondly, you won't use them as much as you will hiragana. Kanji, on the other hand, is something you will actually remember quite well once you know them, because they make it easier to read. So let's do the one I did last time. I did a sentence wa tashi wa ni hon jin desu. So I am Japanese. And instead of jin, let's do the kanji there. So let's take the word nihonjin. So ni on jin. So now we're introducing a kanji here. So jin is written with that kanji, which means human being, person. So how you write it, you start from the upper right, go down in a sort of a slightly curve, and then the line going down here is above the center, and it goes like this, and it goes down about the same as the other one. And this means human being, person. And remember from my earlier episodes, I think episode 1, I think, I mentioned that kanji in Japanese, these are Chinese characters that were appropriated for writing Japanese. They have usually at least 2 different readings. One is based on what it refers to in Japanese has been pronounced as in Japanese before the Chinese characters were introduced. And the second readings are based on the sound that this character is pronounced as in Chinese. And of course, is used in loanwords from Chinese, of which makes up as much as almost 50% of the Japanese vocabulary. So in this case, I'll just write this in Romaji now. So we have jin, nin. These are the Chinese pronunciations of the character. But you can see that is what we use now in this word, nihonjin. What you will often see is that in compound words, there seems to be a tendency for the Chinese readings to be used, and when the word is on its own, there's more of a tendency for the Japanese reading to be used. So jin, nin is what's then known as on yomi, which I think means sound reading. Yomi means reading, on means sound, I think, in this case. So it's the reading that is of the sound of Chinese. And then we have hito, which is the kun yomi. I can't remember what kun means exactly in this case, but it's the reading that is the Japanese. I think it means meaning reading, possibly. I'm not sure entirely. So jin, nin, and hito. And from today's lesson, we have hito. So we have that ano hito wa dare desu ka. Who is that person, away from both of the people talking. So jin, nin, hito, that is human being, person, and the one that isn't used in the most formal settings. It's used in a more informal, neutral contexts. But that's the one we are going to be going for in this course. So that's our first kanji, quite a simple one. Next time I probably will add a few more kanji as well. So when you practice your kanji, of course you have to practice how to write it, and of course the order of strokes is vital. It's very easy with this one, but once you get to more complex kanji, the order becomes more tricky and also even more important to pay attention to. I will say something about rules of the order of strokes at some point. So you need to know where to start and where to end each stroke, and also you must remember the onyomi and the kunyomi of the characters as well. So a popular way to practice this is to make flashcards. So on one side of the card you write the character, and on the opposite side you write the onyomi and kunyomi, and then of course you look at, alternatively you can look at the character itself and then you try to remember the pronunciation of it, or you look at the pronunciation and try to remember the character. So you look at the pronunciation and you write the character and you look at it that way. So that's one thing that people do. You can make your own, of course, which is the best way, I think. You can also get ready-made ones, but I think that it's very good practice to actually just get some index cards or just cut some paper and create your own flashcards as you go along. Was there anything else I wanted to say today? I've done kono, sono, ano, demonstratives. And of course, all other demonstratives tend to be based on the same stem. So starting with ko, so, and a. We've done a little bit about formality. We've done the san ending, which is used whenever you talk about, most of the time when you talk about other people, or you address someone else as well by name. And we've done a first kanji, jin, nin, hito, human being, person, one of the simplest kanji in the book. But even though they start looking more complicated, it's not necessarily as complicated as it looks, because it does actually make it easier to read things and you remember it as a picture almost. Right, so I think I'll leave it there for the day. I think that's enough for one lesson. I don't want to make these too long, as you know. So I'll see you next time with more Japanese. And I think it just remains for me to thank you for watching. If you do enjoy this, if you do have any questions, by the way, I should always say, please leave a comment and ask the question in the comments. If you enjoyed this, please like, share, subscribe. Share it on public playlists, share it on social media, Reddit, etc., wherever you want. Join me on Patreon if you really want to support what I'm doing, starting from about £1 a month, I think, and which also gives you discounts on art prints and things as well. And I will see you next time with more Japanese. So thank you very much for watching. Domo arigatou gozaimasu, and sayonara. Goodbye for now. Bye bye.